Okay, good afternoon everybody. As you know, my name's Anita and I have been living in Beijing for 2 years as the Asia Pacific trainer. So I've been based in the region, but I have worked for Oxford for nearly 10 years and I've lived in Oxford for 8 years. So I've been working with the online products for most of that time, and so I'm very happy to come here and tell you what I know about the OED and how you could use it. To begin, I'm going to begin with an introduction about the history of Oxford University Press and the OED, because I thought that would help set the background for you. Right, let me just get used to this equipment. Okay. Right, so the background of Oxford University Press is it's nearly 500 years long. And the University of Oxford first started printing books in the 1500s. That was shortly after the first printing presses came to the UK and to Oxford. In 1586, the King of Britain authorised the university to print the Bibles, so that was really an important step in our publishing. About 100 years later, in the 1600s, because the printing was now becoming quite a major part of the university appointed 12 professors or delegates to run the publishing division. And that structure is actually still in place today. So Oxford University Press is actually a department of Oxford University, and it's still run by 12 professors who authorise the quality of everything we publish. So no title is agreed until it passes their approval. Okay, so in the 1800s we really started moving into academic publishing, and it was then that the Philological Society in London came up with the idea that we needed a more complete dictionary of English, one that traced the background and history of the language back to Middle English, so the 1100s onwards. So that's how the OED fits in with the history. And shortly after that, we opened up branches overseas, and that's when Oxford University Press became an international publisher. Okay, so I just thought I'd give you a picture of the first editor of the OED. This is James Murray, and he was actually the head of the London Philological Society. And they first made the agreement in 1857 they first put forward the idea in the 1850s, but it wasn't until nearly 30 years later that they actually started work. Hence, you see, it's already quite old. The dictionary itself took nearly 50 years to finish, so unfortunately he died before it was ever finished. But he was he brought a lot of expertise from the Philological Society. Okay, so the history of the OED. As I mentioned, they began work in 1879. And Sir James Murray, who you just saw, he estimated that it would take maybe 10 years, 4 volumes, to do the complete history of English. So 5 years later, they'd got up to the word ant. So they thought maybe they should rethink this. So they began to publish every volume as it was completed, and in total it was 20 volumes. And the last volume came out in 1928. And the first volume of the OED contained 400,000 words, each with a full etymology and definitions. So that was the first edition. After that, the Oxford University Press continued the revisions and updating on each entry in Word. And so it was several decades later, in 1989, that the second edition finally published in print. And this time it contains 600,000 words. So that's the edition that would be in any library around the world now that has the print edition usually. Now, the OED has never ever made a profit because it just takes so much research, effort, so many people involved. So it's just not possible for it to be a viable book that makes a profit. So for this reason, it really fits in with our mission as a university publisher. Because we receive grants from the government and we received a huge research grant for the OED, we can fund academic projects like this that further academic knowledge. So it's not the sort of thing a commercial publisher could do. And due to receiving a large grant, it was for $34 million back in the 80s, I think, that we're still working on that, we were able to launch the OED online. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We continue the research and the updating, and all of this new research goes online every 3 months. So actually, you have part of the 3rd edition. When the entire dictionary has been worked through again, it may be published as the new print 3rd edition. But at this stage, we don't know if anyone actually wants to buy the print books in 10 or 20 years. Maybe it will be an online-only world. Okay, so a little bit of background on how the OED was written originally. Each entry was written out on a paper slip like this, and this is in the original handwriting of Sir James Murray. So this is the entry for affirm. And you have at the top some of the forms, and then the etymology, and below that the definitions. And on the back of the slip would be some quotations showing the evidence of where they found it in print. So there had to be 400,000 of these slips, and we still have them all in the museum in Oxford. Now, in contrast with the OED online, you now have 626,000 words with definitions, all the full detailed etymologies, and in total there are 3 million historical and contemporary quotations. The quotations is a really unique part of the OED because it does span over 1,000 years. So you have quotation evidence in early and middle English. It comes from plays, works of Shakespeare, for example, the Bible, cookery books, journals, all manner of different sources. And recently we've been able to add in the Oxford Historical Thesaurus of English, which we will look at. And that fits perfectly with the OED, enabling you to do more advanced things that would be useful for linguistics or people who are really studying language in depth. Okay, so in contrast to that little slip, we have here how a dictionary entry looks in the OED online. So this is the entry for affirm, and you can see you have the forms at the top, different possible spellings over different time periods. Do we have a little pointer on here? Etymology there, I think. Maybe the mouse is easier, actually. And here, all of the quotations. And you can see here the first quotation was from a version of the Bible. Please turn the lights down. Yeah, I think it'll be easier. And we can see the first time we found the word affirm in print was 1382. With the OED online, you have advanced search. So I'm going to show you some of these things on the live site. That's just to give you a taste. Now, who it can be useful for. If you're reading English literature, it's ideal for looking at words that come up in different time periods. For example, Shakespeare or Chaucer, where the language can be substantially different. If you're researching in linguistics, language or history, or even just love English, And there's also more cultural background you can get from seeing the origin of a word. So I hope to show you today how language is always a changing thing, and we can track some of these social changes through looking at language. The OED is also contains scientific terms, just to mention that, and it is valid in a British court of law. They always, if there's any dispute around the meaning of a word, they do refer to the OED, so it's respected as an authority. Okay, so some things to think about that we'll look at in the demo. We'll look at what date kimchi was first found in an English publication. And why is the word skyscraper around before the buildings even existed? So we'll get some background on that. And also another point about looking at words that mean the same thing through the thesaurus. For a tall man, we also find the word tiny listed. So we'll investigate why that may be there. Okay, any questions on the history before I move on to the live demo? So just think about that and let me know. No? Okay. Right, so we have the home page here. Let me just, okay, full screen. And most of the searching can be done very easily through the quick search. Now we can also see a few other tools on the home page, which I will show you, such as timelines, sources, categories, and the historical thesaurus. We've also got an advanced search here. But first of all, I'm just going to focus on how the OED is different to an ordinary dictionary. And we'll start with that search for the word skyscraper. Now, in order to write the dictionary, throughout the history of the OED, we've always asked for volunteers to be part of reading programmes. So that is also part of the background of writing the OED. Because I mentioned there's so much research effort involved, we would sometimes make appeals to the public, and perhaps it would be in general, if the readers, the volunteers found a new word, they would write it out on a slip with the quotation and the book that they found it in and send it in. And this would form part of the basis for the editors to do the research. So you'll note that there's a lot of quotations for each in the dictionary entry. So I'll come back to the reading programme later. Now first of all, I want to show how it's different to an ordinary dictionary. So up here, I'm just going to hide the quotations first. So what we're looking at here is every meaning for the word skyscraper in date order, starting with the earliest and coming down to the latest. So the OED is really a bit like language archaeology, because what you're looking at here is like taking a slice of the earth and seeing like different layers over time. Yeah. So the very earliest meaning of the word skyscraper that we have on record was referring to the sails on a ship. And that was from 1794 from a book called Elements, Rigging and Seamanship. So if you click on the work, you can just see a bit of information about the author and the title, and also possibly find more quotations from that work. Now, another meaning was for a tall horse, a tall man, and then even a tall story, which means a story that's not necessarily true. And finally, a high building of many stories. So we can see the word skyscraper was used for anything that was tall. And when the buildings came about, it was natural to just take a word that already existed and apply that. And for the sense of the tall buildings, we can see the quotation evidence here from journals and newspapers, some fiction. They're mainly newspapers actually here. So that gives you a sense of the variety. I'll just close that one. So, for a very tall man, we have the phrase, "I say, old skyscraper, is it cold up there?" So that sounds kind of funny in English. And it's from a publication called Vulgar Tongue. So, for each different meaning, there is actually a set of words in the thesaurus. So we have fully integrated the historical thesaurus alongside the dictionary entries. So what that does is that for every sense of the word skyscraper, you can find a set of words that meant the same thing in history. So it's looking at the concept rather than the word. So, for a tall man, we can see that in the thesaurus we're looking at the category tallness, and these words were referring to tallness, including tiny. And if I go to the historical thesaurus, we can see underneath tiny, it says a nickname for a very large or tall man in 1931. So perhaps if you're reading some American novel and you find this word, this can just help you understand the context and background. Okay. Alright, so we're now in the historical thesaurus, and at the top of here we have our address where we are. So what the historical thesaurus has done is categorise every single word in the OED by concept. And all of these concepts are listed on the left-hand side. Now this is a different way of looking at language because you can track perhaps the change of language and meaning through looking at the concepts. So a word may have different companion words in its same group. Now let's have a look on the left. We're in tallness. We could go to shortness, which is in the same category. We're in bodily height, and then there are several categories within that. Let's have a look at the adjectives to describe shortness. And they start from 900 AD. And we see different dates for words that may have been used over time. Some really funny phrases. Even now we use this, knee-high to a grasshopper. Where's the nanoid, I think is a funny one. Because it sounds like the nano iPod, which sounds really modern, but actually we can see the roots go back much earlier. If I just go to if I click on nanoid, we will go to the dictionary entry for nanoid, and then you can actually look at the history of that word alone. So whilst I'm waiting, okay, it's gone through. Okay, so in the word for nanoid, we can look at the etymology at the top here and see that it comes from classical Latin, meaning nanus, which was the word for a dwarf. And then we can just show a bit more. And we even get the Greek origin as well for that word, meaning dwarfish. So it just shows how some modern words have, what kind of roots they have. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the historical thesaurus, and whilst I'm just waiting for the site to catch up, I'll just give you some background on the creation of the historical thesaurus. This was actually created by the English department at the University of Glasgow, and a professor there in the 1960s thought it would be that the OED was great, but he thought you could do even more with it if you could search it by concept. So he was part of the Philological Society, which was the original society that had the idea for the OED. So he talked to them about it, and they thought it would be a great idea, and they supported his idea. And so the University of Glasgow did the work and the research. It took 44 years to complete it. And that only came out in 2010 in print. So it exists as a book, but OUP purchased the content so that we could integrate the two together. So that's how it came about. Now you can search the historical thesaurus alone up here. If I put in the word fuming, we can see which categories fuming may appear in. So it's got 11 different thesaurus classes. Now if we were to look at the dictionary entry for fuming, we would see, like skyscraper, it has all the different meanings listed, but each of those meanings places it in a different group of words. So for example, one sense could be angry. So if I was to click on the entry here and see the category for angry words, we would just see what kind of words would have a similar meaning to the concept of fuming at that time then, or over history. So the site is just a little bit slow around this at the moment. And another sense of the word fuming could be full of emitting vapour, so gases or incense. So this just gives you a sense of how fuming can mean quite different things. It can refer to perfumes, which is sense 2, so a fragrant aroma in the air. So if I click on fuming here, we will see fuming and a list of other words that mean fragrant over time. Okay, so these are all on the right, and on the left we can see where we are in the index. Okay, so the main idea is that it's looking at language by concept, that words themselves are not fixed things really, so it's trying to analyse language by concept. Now, we can come into the historical thesaurus from the home page, and here we can see how the entire English language has been broken down into 3 starting concepts. The first is the external world, then the mind, and then society. And then within these categories, we could browse by selecting a further category within them. So if I just click authority, that's the starting point for lots of other categories that are placed within there. So from here, I could then look at rule or government and see what has been categorised within that. From there, we may want to have a look at politics, and then see what kind of concepts of politics exist in the English language. So this has relationships with linguistics, social anthropology, philosophy, because you're looking at the way that language perhaps shapes the thoughts that we have. So one language can contain a certain set of thoughts and concepts that may not match with another language. So that's just perhaps one possible area to explore. So I hope that this gives you an idea of the potential of looking at the thesaurus. So I'm just now in the area for international agreements, and if I click on treaty, I'll just find 21 words that have been used for the word treaty over time. So it's a little bit tricky to grasp the concept of the thesaurus sometimes at first, so I just want to check if you've got any questions about it right now. No? Okay. Yeah?
Well, I thought I was pretty familiar with OED, but until now. But looking at this historical thesaurus, this is an amazing thing. I have never looked up into this historical thesaurus. And my question is, this kind of conceptual hierarchy is a very elegant stuff, and of course I could see from the front page of the historical thesaurus the three, the topmost categories, and then were subcategories there. Is there any kind of literature that describes how those concept hierarchies were designed by University of Glasgow?
That's probably a very good question. Now, I'm not an academic, so I don't know those things, but there are information pages on the OED if you want to go into more detail. So let me have a look at the home page. And in the middle it says search the OED's information pages. And if you click there, we could just look up the historical thesaurus, and I know there are several articles by a professor at the University of Glasgow about the thesaurus. So this is just, you could look up anything in here. This is all information just about the OED. Historical thesaurus. Now, I'll probably think a starting point may be what is the historical thesaurus of the OED, and it's got some background on compiling the thesaurus. Now, you could have a look at this in detail, but I'm not sure that I personally know. Oh, classifications. It says establishing the classification was the second major undertaking of the project. And I'll just see if they do say anything about that. I don't think they actually describe on the site the academic rationale for that, I'm afraid. Yeah, it's not actually there. But I know that the OED team are always happy to receive questions. There is a contact us page there. But I'll give the feedback. Maybe it's something they should put on the site. Okay, so let's have a look at what else it can do. Right, so whilst the thesaurus is quite specialist, there's a way of browsing called categories that is sort of more the general user. So you don't have to be studying linguistics to be able to get some benefit out of this. It's much less complicated. So it's very simple. Within the first category, you've got subject areas. So, for example, there's 191 words in the OED that refer to beekeeping. You can scroll down each of these: crafts and trade, military, and when you select one, you can get subcategories within those. On the right-hand side, we have words that are particular to regions of the world, such as Australian English. Or also words that have entered English through another language. Now, for Central and East Asian languages, we can see we have 15 words that have come from Korean. I'll come back to the Korean words a little bit later, but first I'll just show you the Japanese words, because there's more of those, 499. So I've selected that, and then the next stage is that we can refine this search a little further. So each of these words here come from Japanese. And here on the right it says refine your search. So if I select slang, we can find 10 words that have some sort of colloquial or slang use in everyday English that come from Japanese. And so one of them is honcho, which in English, normally we might say the head honcho, it means the boss. And if we look at the entry for that, it tells us it's chiefly used in the US. And it comes from the Japanese Hancho group leader. Okay, so that's just using the categories. Right, there's another way of looking at words that come from other languages using advanced search. So it says language of origin here. You can put Korean in there and it will find the 15 words. But I also want to show you the etymology. This will actually find more words. Now the reason for that is, if you do an etymology search, it's not just searching for Korean words themselves, but words that where the concept has travelled into English as well. So they may sound like an English word, but the concept has travelled. Okay, so we now see there's 22 words. So 15 of these will be Korean, like bin and bap. But we have one which sounds English, bus girl, and it's related to the Korean bosugol. You're all laughing. Okay. So I'm just waiting for the entry for bus girl to come up. So although it's got an etymology of bus and girl, it does also refer to, oops, this has got in the way. It does refer to the Korean word bosugol as well down there. Okay, I'll just go back to my search result. So, sorry, the cross-reference was in the way there. Right, so I promised to let you know about the first date of kimchi, didn't I? So let's go back to the results. And here we have the entry for kimchi, and it tells us it entered English in 1898 on the right here. Let's have a look at that entry. So, etymology, entirely Korean. Now, if I show the quotations, the first one is from a famous explorer, well, famous perhaps in the Victorian age, Isabella Bird, who wrote Korea and Her Neighbours. And I think she's interesting because she was a woman, and in the Victorian age she travelled alone across China, Korea, North Korea, it was all one then. And she wrote about her experiences. So her biography is also in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, which you can link to here if you have access. And the quote was, just wine, soup, eggs and kimchi were produced and had to be partaken of. So that's just a quite nice account of a woman travelling in Korea there, an English woman. Further down, we've also got different kinds of quotations by some foreigner, I imagine, who talks about kimchi being a horrible dish made out of vegetables which have become rotten. So, sorry about that. Okay, so anyway, most of them are very positive. All right then. Okay, so this is looking at the effect of other languages on English, showing how language is a changing thing. Right, some other things we can do in advanced search are around looking at the quotations. So I'll just go back to the advanced search. So far we've looked at searching the etymology. Now if you open out this drop-down box, you can search different parts of each entry, such as the definition, the etymology or language, and then there's a large part relating to the quotations. If I select first quotation and type in Shakespeare, I can find all the words where the very first evidence we have for that word was in a work of Shakespeare. So we've got 1,731 entries. One of them is academe, which is like saying academy or academia, dating from 1598. And if we go to that entry, and I show the quotation, we can see the first evidence for that word was from Shakespeare's play Love's Labour Lost. And in the etymology for this word, it's also dating back to classical Latin as well. Okay, so that's looking at the influence perhaps of writers from a long time ago, but we can also search more recent authors as well. You could look for quotation text, so the name of a book, quotation author, quotation date. So I'm just going to pick quotation author and put in J.K. Rowling and see if she's made it into the OED. Okay, so each of these words have had their meaning illustrated by a sentence from Harry Potter. So owlry would be a natural one. And also the word muggle is there as well, which I'm sure you've all heard of. So if I go to the entry for muggle, we can see that the word is invented by J.K. Rowling. And it says in her work, it means a person who possesses no magical powers. But it also mentions how it has extended uses, a person who lacks a particular skill or skills. Now, in the quotations, we have an example from Harry Potter, naturally. And then next we have a quote from Computer Weekly, an IT magazine. And it says, our new senior DBA starts on Monday. She's a muggle, no IT background, understanding or aptitude at all. So it's just showing how, although muggle evolved in the fiction of J.K. Rowling, it's travelled into everyday language and got a new meaning there. So the OED enables us to track this kind of evolution of language. Okay, so another way we look at all of these quotations is through the sources. And from the home page it tells us we can explore the top 1,000 sources in the OED. So in the last session a student asked, what is the breakdown of all of those quotations? Well, I don't exactly know, but we can get some data from looking at these top 1,000. For example, using the sources tool, we can see which authors were perhaps more creative with English. Now in here we can see that the highest source to illustrate the meanings of words was from the Times newspaper. So there were 38,000 quotations from the Times newspaper. William Shakespeare, also very high. Encyclopedia Britannica. Scrolling down we see a lot of newspapers, but also authors like Charles Dickens, the Wycliffe edition of the Bible. Acts of Parliament even are cited, so quite a range of sources there. Now if I click on a particular author, I'll just pick Shakespeare again, we can see which of his plays are the most quoted texts in the OED. So if you just want to find quotations from one of these plays, you can just click Find Quotations in OED and you'll get all the examples from Hamlet, for example. So I've just clicked Find Quotations for Hamlet and it gives percentages. It tells us 5% of his quotations are from Hamlet. So for the word abhorred, there's a quotation for Hamlet, so if I click on the entry, that will take us through to the dictionary entry, and his quotation is actually in the second meaning, so it's not the first one. So it could be, in fact, that Shakespeare took that word and actually imbued it with a new meaning, filled with horror. And then the quotation is, how abhorred my imagination is, my gorge rises at it, from Hamlet. Okay, so that leads us on to looking at which authors were more creative with language. I'll just go back to the data around Shakespeare. And you'll see these other tabs here. First in entry or first in sense. Now for the word abhorred, Shakespeare's quote was actually the first in sense. So, for example, if you were writing about perhaps Byron and Wordsworth, and you wanted to compare who was more creative with language, we can compare their data here. If I look up the poet Byron, dates from the 1800s, we can see, just look at the number of times that his words were the first for a sense, or his quotations were the first evidence at all. Okay. Any questions whilst I'm waiting? No? Alright. So, Lord Byron. 212 quotations illustrate the very first evidence for a word, but 738 are for the very first evidence for a new meaning for a word. Okay, so if we remember those numbers, and then just quickly compare it with Wordsworth. So Wordsworth was a poet around the same time period. And we can see it's actually a lot less. Completely died. Okay. It went loose here. I've got it. Yes, thank you. Okay, so for William Wordsworth, first evidence for his sense was only 250. So we can see overall that William Wordsworth was probably a lot more conventional with language based on this evidence. It's just a theory, but it could be a starting point which you could back up with more research perhaps. Okay, does that seem clear to everyone about sources? All right. Okay, now each one of you can create your own personal login. Now at the top here we've got My OED, and you can create your profile in the top right for the first time, but I will just sign in. This is not to log in, it's basically so that you can save your own lists of words. Okay, so it says welcome Anita Joyce now. And I can have a look at my OED and see what I've saved. Alright, so I would need to click the tab Saved Entries up here. And you can create your own folders and call them names as well. So all my saved entries are here. There's 52 words. That for some reason I wanted to save each of these. Then if I want to check my folders, so I may have organised some of them, such as words with a Chinese origin I wanted to come back to, or unusual words. And then we'll just have a look at what I've got in there. So I've just got a few words here that I found unusual to me. Bardolatry is like the worshipping of Shakespeare. It's like a play on idolatry. Cream crackered is rhyming slang for knackered, which means being very tired. Obombrative, now you'll see this little cross here. That's what we put when a word is obsolete, which means definitely no longer used today. But that would be, from the root of the word, we can see it's something to do with a shadow. So the word was referring to overshadowing. Okay, so that's just looking at my OED, just a little tool that you can use to save your own lists. Now, the final thing I want to show you about the tools is the timelines. This is also a nice little tool to visually look at language, and it links into social sciences as well, as a way of looking at trends or themes over time. So, what we're looking at here is the whole English language over 1,000 years, and each bar refers to the number of new words during that 50-year period. We can change the periods by decade, so I could actually track which decade we have the most evidence for new words in the history of English. And that probably fits in with what we know about the Enlightenment period. At the end of the 1880s, there was a great flourishing of literature and writing, so that fits in well. But you could refine that, you could perhaps analyse why there's peaks in these particular decades, or this one. Or you could refine it by particular subject areas. So if I look at the arts, I could select categories within the arts until I find the category for jazz. So we'll just wait for that to load. So we can basically look at the history, perhaps of jazz through language, like which decade most of the words referring to jazz come out. Or it could be another topic. So again, it's useful for the social sciences in general, perhaps. Okay, performing arts, music, and then we see this huge spike in the 1930s. And if I click on that bar, we get the results for 104 words that date from the 30s, all referring to jazz. So cat obviously means something else, but in this case there's a jazz slang connection. Okay. So let's just have a look at that entry. So we see it as one particular sense within the whole entry for cat, which is probably quite huge. So the entry also for dog runs into pages as well. And here we can see all the compounds as well for the word cat. So, care killed the cat, so phrases like that, or cat burglar, perhaps a more well-known one. So each of these is also within this entry, so it does make it a very long one. You've also got phrases as well. A cat may look at a king. And then all the compounds below. And there are quotations for each one. So this one goes down long, long way. Okay, so we've had a look at each of these tools and the entries, and also saving an entry. Perhaps I've forgotten to show you how to actually save an entry, so I'll just show you that now. So for the word dog, I'll just go into it. Now, when you do a search like this, you can see that it says N2. So when you have more than one noun, they'll be numbered as separate entries if the meaning is different enough. So I think the editors make a decision as to whether a sense appears within a word entry, or if it's substantially different enough and they believe there's enough evidence for it to be like considered an entirely separate word, they just call it like a second noun or a third noun. V is for verb, obviously. So let's just have a look at the first noun for a dog. And on the right here, you can see how the dictionary is displayed just like looking at the print dictionary, and the year is also given as well. You can reorder this, so if you wanted to find all the words that came into existence in the same year, you can just click this arrow there. Okay, now my entry for dog is here. At the top, you'll just see these little buttons that say print, save, email and cite. So particularly cite may be one you may want to use. Save will save it to your own personal area. Cite comes up with two different styles, MLA and Chicago, and you can export to 4 different citation packages. Okay. Now, on the home page in the middle, you have helpful resources. If you come across an abbreviation you don't understand, you can check that in abbreviations used in the OED. So sometimes you'll see a year, and it may say C before it or A, and you can check what that means in the abbreviations list. So if it says A 1300s, it means ante, which that is Latin for before. And if it says C, that will be circa. So you would just go to C, which is there, without a dot. So C with a dot is referring to century. So it's very specific. So that's just help with using the OED. Also on the home page are features and updates. And that's in the bottom left-hand corner. So every 3 months we update the site, and you can read the letter from the editor from the links given there. We also have some articles. So right at the bottom it says more aspects of English. So shapers of English, or English in time, and academics or editors have written several articles on particular topics. So one of them could be the rise of global English, and that's about the concept of globish, and looking at the fact that perhaps English is most widely spoken by people who are not native English speakers, and what impact that may have on the language, and developing a new kind of common language between people for whom English is a second language. Also the effect of computers on English as well. So just some essays there about particular topics to catch your interest. We also have some YouTube videos as well about a number of different things. So if I just scroll down to the bottom, it says videos, Oxford Dictionaries. This takes us to our YouTube channel. And we've got a lot at the moment about the OED appeal. I'll come back to that. Here we've got writing the OED. So the one on new words is perhaps particularly interesting. The editor talks about the process for adding new words to the dictionary, like how she investigates them, looking at new meanings, whether it's time for it to go in the dictionary. Up here we've got all the OED appeals. Now that's on the home page. We've just launched a new appeal recently, and there's a separate web page all about this. This is part of the research in writing the OED, and over the history of writing the OED, OUP have often appealed to the general public to assist with finding records of language. So it says here, do you have an earlier record of a word which our editors are currently researching? So it's an appeal to the public to help with these particular words here. So we're just trying to find out if there's any earlier evidence for, say, the word gangster, earlier than 1886. And there's a whole list there. Okay, so thank you very much for watching this tour of the OED. And I'm open here for any questions or anything you want to look at, just let me know.
Maybe you mentioned that at the beginning of the status quo and also the history of OED. And what is the size of the OED team now?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. There's about 70 editors who are based in Oxford that are full-time employees. 70, yeah. And many of them will have their own particular specialties. So someone might just have a specialism in Middle German etymology. So that was like someone I knew when I was working in Oxford. So I was amazed it's that specific. So they'll be divided up into their particular areas. So it may be she only works on part of each of an entry that is related to German. So some may be looking at new words, and also they're working through the entire OED in alphabetical order, as I mentioned, to create the third edition. But as well as that, they also have lists of words where they feel that the entries need a bit more, that they just think there's more research to be done around certain topics. So when you look at the updates here, so the December update, learn about the latest revisions and new words. It just shows that one of the more recent themes was around transport and looking at the word car. It was saying it was a Celtic word actually that has made it big in English. So again, the word car was around before really cars existed. So the entry goes through, the update covered lots of words that were related to car, such as automobile, so they choose topics as well. Okay. As well as the 70 employed editors, there's also freelance workers that are paid for particular areas of research, and then the volunteer reading programme.
I have a practical question. Just, I'm in the middle of writing my PhD dissertation using OED, and I definitely need English quoted from Old English to present English. What I want to know is, if I want to find out a certain kind of specific strings, for example, complex preposition, for example, in spite of, and I want to sort out whole quotation from the Old English to present day usage. Can you show me how to find out the quotation, whole quotation involved in the
So you're asking about the evolution of a whole quotation?
Yeah.
I don't think it covers quotations, but it doesn't focus on particularly the detail of those. Let's have a look at an example of one. I think I've had that question before. I think that might be a separate book. So, example, cats and dogs, or let's just have a look at a quote. That's not a quote. Let's have a look at hair of the dog. I've not got the full quote there. I was thinking of raining cats and dogs. Hair of the dog. So you probably get some quotation evidence. And now it tells us, say, this phrase, hair of the dog, dates from 1546, but still in use presently, so up to 2001 is the latest record. And I'll just show the quotes. So it's got quotation evidence over time for that phrase. But what it doesn't give is, I suppose it doesn't do an etymology necessarily, but it does have a little bit of background here. Apparently so called on account of the remedy formerly recommended as a cure for the bite of a mad dog. Compare Dutch. So it has got some origin in this case, but it doesn't necessarily have origin for every quotation. We can see one here, so it does seem that there's, like this one doesn't have any origin, to help a lame dog over a stile. Is that what you were asking? Okay. Do you find that the OED, from what you've seen today, did you feel surprised about some of the things it does, or I'm just interested to hear what was new for you? We heard that you found the historical thesaurus a new area. I mean, yeah, I think it's got great potential, but because I don't study in detail, I can't answer in depth. But I studied social anthropology, and even in social anthropology we studied the sort of concept around language and how it affects the way a particular culture may think. So I can see the relationships from my own academic background.
I have a question that may be a shared question for many of us, maybe. When we cite the historical quotation, if that comes from Old English, for example, like earliest ones often range around the 900 or so. In that case, the sentence itself, the quotation, we cannot understand the meaning of that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because there's Old English.
In Old English.
Middle English may be relatively okay, but still difficult. And is there a way, as a practical question, is there a way we can get some reasonably understandable modern interpretations for those quick quotations?
I'm afraid that's not in the OED, no.
Okay, just, as a general question.
Oh, I don't know how to do it, I'm afraid. You're the professor of English, so... But I know the OED doesn't do that.
Yeah, I was not hoping too much, but... And you mentioned that the update frequency is about 3 months. Is that what you said?
Yeah, every 3 months.
I don't know. I may be mistaken, but once I did some search and I got all the domains of those categories, category of meanings. I had that in my word processing program, and when I accessed that about a year later or so, I found that the whole organization was wrong. So I may be wrong that my first memo, first notation was taken wrong, but I'm just wondering how extensive is that change there? Is that just adding some new quotations or so, or do you really reshuffle the whole concept of hierarchy sometimes?
The updates.
Yeah, update.
So the updates can include entirely new words or revised entries.
And revision can be extensive too.
The revisions could be slight or extensive. Yeah, it's quite a mixture. It depends really on what is needed. So sometimes they might find an earlier record. So that's really what the appeals is about, where they suspect that a word really does have an earlier origin, and they're looking specifically for that. Sometimes it can be adding a new sense because language has evolved, so they want to add a later sense for a word. Okay. So where are you all from? Are you studying literature or linguistics, or what is the interest here?
Linguistics.
Oh, it's linguistics, right. Linguistics is quite a hard topic. I only know a little about it from my studies in social anthropology, but I'm hoping that what I've shown you gives you some pointers and in ways that you could use this, particularly perhaps around the thesaurus. Is there anything else you'd like to ask? Also, feedback is welcome because I take comments back to Oxford as well, because they're always eager to know how people want to use the online products, and that helps us shape our development as well. So please put any comments on the feedback form. So if you have nothing else to ask, I'd be very grateful for your comments on the training, on what you learned, what you found helpful about it or not, and also anything you'd like to see about the product also would be very useful to know. So thank you very much.